The liturgy today gives us three subjects of reflection, all of them very important. Today is the Sunday of the Divine Mercy, because in the Gospel we heard how Christ conferred to the apostles the power to forgive sins. It is an opportunity to reflect on the love God showers upon us each time we encounter Him, especially in the sacrament of reconciliation. In the Gospel, the story of Thomas makes us reflect on Jesus' resurrection and on the gift of faith, of believing without seeing. Finally, the reading from the Acts of the Apostles describes how the first community of believers lived. This is so appropriate for us as we are a new community. Let us reflect on the life of the new community. The Catholic Church, as the community of faithful as it is now, was really born at the resurrection of Jesus. Before Jesus' passion, there was a group of disciples around Jesus. But after his resurrection and ascension, the community was essentially different, even if Jesus was still there in a spiritual and sacramental presence. After the resurrection, everything changed in the life of the community because they had to take care of themselves and live without Jesus around, to be the ones who preach the gospel, the message of the kingdom, and not be simply followers of Him. We commented last week what a powerful experience they had of the resurrection, to the point of preaching everywhere a risen Lord that they could not show physically. As we said, for the Pharisees, it was a nonsense. If He had risen, why wouldn't He show Himself? His absence was a strong argument not to believe in their preaching. But something was stronger than that. Their faith was not a myth nor superstition. The passage says that they bore witness to the resurrection with great power. The power came from the preaching, but also from the miracles they were able to perform. This is amazing. During the time of Jesus, they would be simply observers of Jesus after His departure. They were not afraid of anything. And then their preaching was accompanied by a testimony of life. Their lifestyle was admirable. Every day, we read in chapter 2, they would devote themselves to prayer, listen to the doctrine of the apostles, break the bread, and live in fellowship. In today's passage, we hear how they were of one heart and mind and would share their possessions so that no one would be in need. Isn't this powerful? Isn't this way of life attractive? To live in a community, share the meals, the children play together, and encourage one another with prayer and good works. Since I was a child, I had the opportunity to experience this way of life. It is something wonderful. Of course, there's always the danger of abuse, of one taking the advantage of the other. But when you live with sincerity, it is awesome. Through centuries, many men and women have felt the calling to sell their possessions, to give the money to the poor, and to live dedicated to prayer, sharing life with other brothers and sisters in faith. It is something that the world cannot understand, for the world doesn't know the spiritual good. Nevertheless, the world is amazed by these men and women and feel jealous of their capacity of detachment. Now, applying the word to ourselves, this gospel tells us first of all that the community of faith was born from the paschal mystery of Christ, from the experience of His resurrection. And so, even if we've had Mass in this place for 7-8 years, it is only recently that we have begun to be a community. People have told me that before there wasn't really fellowship. People would not know one another but just come to Mass. What a calling right now, after having experienced for the first time together and in such a way the mystery of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, to become a new community of Christians and to imitate the testimony of the first community of faith. First of all, we need to understand that our roots or in the celebration of Christ's resurrection. This is the reason of our community, of our gathering, of our fellowship. Christ has gathered us for the celebration of his mystery. This is not simply a philanthropic society. This is a religious association. We gather first of all to celebrate Christ's mystery. And we cannot gather less than once a week. Otherwise, what kind of community are we? Meeting every 2 or 3 weeks or once a month? Spiritual ties appear when there is a frequent relationship. But the fount is in Christ. He is the reason of our gathering, and he is the source of what ties us to one another, especially the breaking of the bread, the fact of all sharing the word and the Eucharist. Secondly, we need to overcome the habit of the baseball touch base and run. We see people running away as soon as the Mass is over, or even before sometimes. Where are they going? What is so important that we need to run away? This is a challenge because it is a habit of most of the Catholics. We come to Mass for an obligation, we try to get rid of it as soon as possible. We have said from the beginning, we're not trying to build a church but a community. Only the community justifies the need of a church. There's no sense of spending so much money in building a church. St. Patrick and St. Michael have just expanded their own church, and we can fit perfectly over there. We're going to build a church here because we are a community. We have our own identity as the community of St. Francis of Assisi. This identity is not simply the celebration of the Mass that is performed in the other churches. So when we go to church, we arrive early, greet our brothers and sisters, and then after worship, we are not in rush to go away, but we stop to get to know one another and to support ourselves spiritually and materially. Thirdly, in this passage, there is a teaching of poverty. How much we are afraid of hearing these words. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they had everything in common. Those who owned property or houses would sell them, bring the proceeds of the sale, and put them at the feet of the apostles. It scares us off, even to think about it. Why are you so attached to what you own? It is not that I'm going to ask you to do that, but just think for a minute how much you are attached to your goods and frightened of the idea of having to give them away. This is not good. The attachment to possessions impedes us to care for the spiritual goods, to have freedom of heart, to have the capacity to really love one another. An example is the way we tithe or we pledge to the building fund. There are people who have been very generous. They have given abundantly in proportion to what they have. Is it a lot or very little? Others have given a couple of thousands of dollars, but they know that it is nothing compared to what they possess. Like the story of the gospel, when the old lady gave 2 coins to the temple because it was all she had, compared to the rich who gave bags full of money, but they gave out of their abundance. One day, a man asked Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta how much he should give. She answered, "Till it hurts." This is not a homily about tithing, but the generosity of our repaying to God is essential in a community of Christians. Just read how in chapter 5 of the Acts, a couple wanted to make full of God and of the community by selling a property and giving some money after retaining secretly part for themselves. Peter cursed them, and they gave up the ghost immediately. But what a relief when we are generous to God. We feel light. We feel like angels. The reading tells us also how we are supposed to use the money that we receive, helping one another. For me, it is clear how part of the budget of that church has to be dedicated to charities. When you give to the church, you should be already living the commandment of helping the poor, because this is what the church does with the money. Sometimes we find the temptation of doing extra collections to cover other needs because people don't give generously in the collection, but also because people don't know how the money is used, so they don't give what they should. Our community has to be concerned with the needs of our neighbors and has to be a solution to them. It is not enough to feed with the gospel. We need to provide for their material needs. What an example of life of the first community. What a program for our church. Now that we are building our community, this should be a concern. Is there a need to be a different community? Is there a calling from God to live the gospel in its fullness? Do we have our own identity? And is it according to the gospel? We gather for prayer. God is the foundation of our community. We are a community where we care and spend time together. And we are a family that takes care of the brothers and sisters in need. A community generous with their goods and their talents. We can be sure that if we are truly the community of Christ, powerful signs will happen. The first community always gathered in prayer with Mary. And so we ask the Queen of the Apostles to intercede for our community, that we may be authentic and in that way be light and witness to the world.